They cornered the young disabled woman at her handmade shop, laughing as they shattered everything she'd built to help rescue animals. Her loyal golden retriever, Sunny, barked and tried to protect her, only to be kicked aside as tears filled her eyes. The men thought their money could buy silence, but just beyond the street, a police officer on patrol and his canine partner Rex had already heard the cry for help, and what happened next would remind an entire town that justice still has a heartbeat. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and miracles that still happen today. The morning sun rose gently over Charleston, filtering through a canopy of ancient oaks that stretched across Marion Square like the open arms of something timeless. Shafts of golden light fell through the leaves, painting the brick paths in shifting patches of warmth and shadow. The air carried the mingled scent of roasted coffee, fresh bread, and the faint perfume of magnolia petals stirred by the wind. It was the kind of morning that promised peace to anyone willing to look for it. And for Emma Brooks, peace was something she built with her own hands. Her booth sat beneath the largest oak, its gnarled roots curling like old veins through the soil. A simple wooden sign read, "Hope Handmade," supporting the Charleston Animal Shelter. On the table before her lay bracelets of twine and polished shells, little wooden pendants shaped like hearts and paw prints, and embroidered scarves of muted blues and creams. Emma arranged them with slow, deliberate care. She was 27, with chestnut hair tied in a loose braid, and a face that still carried traces of youth despite the weariness behind her eyes. A faint scar near her left eyebrow caught the light when she leaned forward. Her hands were deft, graceful, the hands of someone who'd taught herself to move past pain without letting it define her. The wheelchair beneath her made a faint creak as she shifted, adjusting a box of bracelets. But there was nothing fragile about her posture. Emma Brooks didn't see herself as broken. She had lost the use of her legs 3 years ago in a car accident on a rain-slick highway, but she refused to let the world pity her. If anything, she had learned that strength didn't always stand. Sometimes it sat and still refused to fall. Beside her, Sunny, her golden retriever, watched every passer-by with calm, intelligent eyes. His red scarf, hand-stitched by Emma, bore 3 embroidered words, "Hope lives here." He was 7 years old, gentle and loyal, a dog who had once been rescued from the very shelter Emma now fought to rebuild after a devastating fire. "Good boy," she murmured, patting his head as a child stopped to smile at him. Sunny wagged his tail and pressed his muzzle into the girl's hand, tail sweeping the air like sunlight. For a while the morning went as it always did, the steady rhythm of kindness traded for kindness. People came and went, some buying a bracelet, others dropping a few bills into the small donation jar beside the sign. Emma thanked each one with a smile that reached her eyes, even if it hid exhaustion underneath. Then, as noon neared and the market began to thin, laughter, the wrong kind, broke through the air. 3 young men approached from the walkway, their voices loud and careless. The one in front wore a crisp white polo and designer sunglasses. His name was Preston Davenport, the kind of man who had never heard the word "no" spoken with conviction. Behind him trailed Chad Warner, heavy-set, loud, always eager to please whoever stood above him. And Kyle Hendricks, smaller, pale, and uneasy, the type who laughed because silence made him feel seen. "Well, look what we have here," Preston drawled, picking up one of the necklaces from the table. "How much for this? Or does pity come free with purchase?" Emma's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "They're $10. All profits go to rebuilding the shelter." Preston turned the pendant in his hand, pretending to admire it. Then he let it slip through his fingers, shattering against the ground. "Oops," he said with a smirk. Sunny gave a low growl, his fur bristling. Preston stepped closer, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Hey, relax, Princess. Don't let your mutt get brave. We wouldn't want him to end up at that shelter you love so much." The words hit sharper than he knew. Emma forced herself to meet his gaze. "You should go." Kyle hesitated, looking around the park where vendors pretended not to see. "Preston, maybe we should—" "Quiet!" Preston snapped. He leaned closer to Emma's table, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "You think selling trinkets makes you a hero? This world doesn't care about sob stories." Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, but she knew better. Confrontation only gave people like him more to feed on. "Come on, man," Chad muttered, glancing around. "People are looking." Preston grinned wider. "Good. Let them." Sonny barked sharply then, stepping forward, his stance protective. Preston flinched back, his bravado cracking for an instant. "Let's go," Chad said, tugging his arm. Preston sneered one last time. "Enjoy your little charity, sweetheart. Maybe one day you'll sell enough to buy yourself a new pair of legs." The laughter that followed them as they walked away felt colder than the wind. Emma sat still for a long moment. Her pulse thundered, but she refused to cry. With trembling hands, she picked up the broken pendant and placed it gently into a small box beneath the table. Sonny pressed his head against her arm, and she whispered, "It's okay, boy. We're okay." But she wasn't sure she believed it. Across the street, near the park entrance, Officer Mark Hayes watched the scene unfold too late to stop it. He had been finishing his patrol route, Rex trotting dutifully beside him, the German shepherd's posture as disciplined as the man who trained him. Mark was in his late 30s, broad-shouldered with a clean jawline and short dark hair streaked with gray near the temples. His eyes, steady, gray-blue, carried both vigilance and a quiet melancholy. He had once been a patrol officer in Atlanta until a misjudged call cost a child's life and left him reassigned to Charleston, carrying guilt he rarely spoke of. When he saw the three young men laughing as they walked away, something inside him tensed. A reflex. Older than logic. He could have stepped in sooner. He should have. But duty without context was tricky, and these kinds of bullies thrived on attention. He watched as Emma began gathering her scattered items, her movements slow and careful. There was no anger in her face, only quiet resolve. And that stirred something inside him. Rex tilted his head, sensing his handler's unease. "Yeah, I saw it too," Mark muttered. He knelt briefly, giving Rex a pat. "Next time, we won't just stand by." He looked across the park once more. The girl in the wheelchair glanced up. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Hers weary but unbroken, his steady but ashamed. Then, as the afternoon light deepened into amber, she returned to packing her things, and he turned away, continuing his patrol. Neither realized it, but the line between their two lives had just crossed, and neither would walk the same road again. From the far end of the park, Mark glanced back one last time at the girl beneath the oak tree. He didn't know her story, not yet. But something in her silence felt heavier than any crime report, and for the first time in years he felt the weight of responsibility settle, not as duty, but as purpose. The next morning in Charleston arrived with a deceptive calm, the kind that hides unrest beneath the quiet. The sky was washed in pale gold, and the oaks in Marion Square whispered softly, as if trying to shake away yesterday's cruelty. Emma Brooks wheeled herself along the same brick path, her hands steady on the rims, though her wrists ached from the weight of everything that lingered from the day before. Sonny trotted beside her, tail swaying gently, eyes bright but cautious. Her small display table had survived only in pieces. She'd stayed up half the night cleaning the cracked charms, restringing bracelets, repairing the signboard. Not because she expected those boys to apologize, but because giving up would have felt like letting them win. "Okay, Sonny," she whispered as she unfolded the table again, setting out each handmade piece with careful precision. "We're back." The dog gave a low, happy bark as if to say, "We always come back." By late morning, the park was alive again. Vendors unpacked baked goods and paintings. Street musicians tuned guitars, and the air filled with laughter. But Emma still felt the invisible bruise of yesterday's humiliation. When she saw teenagers pass by, her stomach tightened. When she heard loud laughter, her pulse quickened before she could stop it. Across the street, a patrol car rolled slowly to a stop under the shade of an oak. Officer Mark Hayes stepped out, his canine partner Rex landing beside him with a soft thud. The German shepherd's ears perked, his sharp gaze scanning the market like a silent guardian. Mark adjusted his uniform cap and squinted against the light. He hadn't planned to stop here again, but something in his gut, that trained, restless instinct, told him this place wasn't finished with him yet. He spotted Emma almost immediately. She was smiling at a little boy who had stopped to pet Sonny. There was a grace to her gestures, a quiet dignity that resisted pity. Mark admired that kind of strength, the kind that didn't shout or demand, but simply refused to disappear. "Rex," he said softly, resting a hand on the dog's back. "Let's take a walk." They crossed the street. Emma looked up just as Mark approached, his badge catching the sunlight. He looked different in daylight. Not the faceless officer who had watched from afar, but a man whose presence seemed both solid and calm. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice even. "Everything all right today?" Emma blinked, a bit startled by his tone. Polite but genuinely concerned. "Better than yesterday, I hope," she said, attempting a smile. Mark nodded. "I saw what happened. I should have stepped in sooner. I'm sorry." "You did nothing wrong," she replied softly. "They were gone before anyone could help. I just wish people didn't look away so easily." He sighed, eyes shadowed. "Sometimes people freeze. Sometimes they pretend not to see, because it's easier." Their conversation might have gone on longer, but the sudden bark from Sonny broke the fragile peace. The retriever's fur rose slightly as he looked toward the edge of the park. Mark turned instantly. Rex, too, stiffened, both trained instincts reacting before thought. 3 figures approached again. Preston Davenport and his 2 friends. Different clothes, same arrogance. Preston wore mirrored sunglasses and the same smirk that had tainted the day before. He held an iced coffee in one hand, a phone in the other. "Well, well," he said, his voice too loud, too amused. "Our little artist is back. Guess charity cases don't scare easily." Emma's heart skipped. "Just leave," she said quietly. "I don't want trouble." Preston laughed, pulling out his phone. "Trouble? No, no. We just came to get some good footage. My followers love an underdog story." He pointed the camera toward her, the phone's red light blinking. "Smile for the internet." Sonny barked once, sharp and warning. That was when Mark stepped fully between them, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Turn the camera off, now." Preston blinked, momentarily thrown off by the quiet authority in that tone. "Whoa. Look who's here. The hero cop." "Officer Hayes, Charleston PD," Mark said, showing his badge. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes held iron. "You 3 were here yesterday, weren't you?" Preston shrugged. "Just supporting local business." "By destroying her property? You got proof?" Preston smirked, but the confidence was thinner now. Mark stepped closer, the subtle shift of a man who'd learned how to hold a line. Rex mirrored him, moving slightly forward, eyes fixed on the trio. The dog's low growl rumbled through the air. Not a threat, just a promise. "Listen carefully," Mark said. "You walk away right now and you stay away. You show up here again, or you threaten this woman or her dog, I'll file charges for harassment and disorderly conduct, and if you touch her, it becomes assault." Preston scoffed. "Do you know who my father is?" Mark's expression didn't change. The law doesn't ask that question. That silence, that refusal to play by his rules, cut deeper than shouting ever could. Preston's jaw clenched. Chad shifted uneasily, muttering, "Let's go, Press. He's recording this." Mark's body cam light blinked faintly on his vest. Preston noticed. His smirk vanished. "Fine," he said tightly, pointing at Emma. "Enjoy your pity parade, sweetheart. You just made an enemy." They turned and walked off, their laughter thinner now, hollow. Mark exhaled slowly, then turned to Emma. "You all right?" She nodded shakily. "You didn't have to do that." "Sure I did," he said, crouching slightly so their eyes met. "Sometimes doing nothing just teaches bullies they can win." Emma looked down at her, trembling hands. "They won't stop, will they?" Mark's voice softened. "Not if you stand alone. But you're not alone anymore." Sonny, sensing the calm return, nudged her arm gently, pressing his head against her lap. Rex sniffed him once, tail wagging slightly, an unspoken canine truce. For the first time since the attack, Emma felt something break through her fear. Not safety yet, but the first spark of it. Mark helped her gather the scattered items, then stepped back. "I'll make a report," he said. "If they show up again, I want you to call me directly. Here." He scribbled a number on a notepad and tore the page off. "It's my direct line." She hesitated before taking it. "Thank you, Officer Hayes." He smiled faintly. "Call me Mark." As he and Rex walked back toward their patrol car, the air seemed lighter. Emma looked down at the small note in her hand. The ink smudged slightly where her thumb pressed it. She didn't know why, but that small piece of paper felt heavier than it should, like a thread of safety she hadn't realized she needed. From across the street, Preston watched from his idling car. His sunglasses hid the venom in his eyes. He took a long drink of his coffee, jaw tight, then muttered to himself, "He thinks he can embarrass me?" Chad said nothing. Kyle stared out the window, silent, pale. "Tomorrow," Preston said, voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "he'll regret ever saying my name." Meanwhile, back in the patrol car, Mark's radio crackled with static before a sharp voice came through. "Unit 12, report. This is Officer Miller. We've got another disturbance. The Davenport boy again, this time near the docks." Mark froze, a chill crawling down his spine. The same name, the same arrogance. He looked out the window toward the park, where Emma was closing up her booth. Then he whispered to Rex, "Looks like this isn't over yet." The dog gave a quiet whine as if agreeing, and as the sun dipped low over Charleston, two stories, one of cruelty and one of courage, began to intertwine, setting the stage for a reckoning neither of them could yet see coming. Night settled over Charleston with a deceptive beauty, the kind that makes even danger look poetic. The streets shimmered faintly under the amber glow of street lamps, and the quiet rhythm of waves from the nearby harbor whispered like distant breathing. Inside his patrol car, Officer Mark Hayes sat in the dark, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel while the other absently stroked Rex's neck. The German shepherd sat alert in the passenger seat, his breath fogging the window slightly as he watched the slow drift of passing cars. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured. "It's just another quiet night." But even as he said it, he didn't quite believe it. The day had left a restlessness in his chest, that same feeling that always came before something broke. Preston Davenport's threat echoed in his mind like a splinter. "You just made an enemy." He'd heard worse, but what unsettled him wasn't the arrogance. It was the kind of confidence that came from knowing someone powerful would clean up the mess afterward. Mark had seen that kind of protection before. Back in Atlanta, the night a judge's son ran over a homeless man and walked away without charges. That was the night Mark stopped believing justice always wore a badge. "Not this time," he muttered. Rex's ears perked as the radio crackled. "Unit 12, disturbance reported at the Davenport Marina. Possible vandalism. Proceed with caution." Mark straightened, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Speak of the devil." He turned the ignition, the headlights cutting through mist as he pulled onto the damp road. The marina lay half a mile away, where Charleston's wealth slept on the water, rows of private boats swaying under the moonlight. The air smelled of salt and diesel, and the only sound was the dull slap of waves against polished hulls. When Mark arrived, 2 patrol cars already waited. A younger officer waved him over. Officer Blake Mason, barely 24, tall and thin with nervous energy that made his movements jerky. "Evening, sir," Mason said, his voice uncertain. "We got a call about a break-in. Security cam caught movement near Dock 3, but the feed cut off." Mark nodded. "Any suspects?" "Not yet, but—" Mason hesitated, lowering his voice. "They said the Davenport boy was seen near here earlier. Probably drunk again." Mark sighed. "All right, keep the perimeter clear. I'll take Rex and have a look." The dog leapt out of the car, his paws silent on the wet planks. Together they moved down the dock, flashlights sweeping through the mist. Every sound, the creak of ropes, the cry of gulls, felt sharpened. Near the end of the dock, Mark found a shattered bottle glinting beside a luxury yacht. The name painted across the stern read Sea Seraph, property of William Davenport. "Of course," he muttered. Rex sniffed the air, then froze, tail stiff. "What is it, boy?" The dog gave a low growl, eyes locked on the narrow walkway between 2 boats. Mark followed his gaze and caught movement, a shadow stumbling, a voice muttering something incoherent. "Police, stay where you are!" Mark called. The figure froze, then turned. Preston Davenport, his designer jacket soaked, his breath fogging from liquor and rage. "You," Preston slurred, "you think you can ruin my life?" Mark kept his flashlight steady. "You're drunk, Preston. Put your hands where I can see them." Preston laughed, that same hollow laugh from the market, but now twisted by fear. "My father owns half this town. You think anyone cares what you say?" Before Mark could reply, another figure appeared behind Preston, Mr. William Davenport, his father. The man was in his late 50s, tall, silver-haired, wearing a dark overcoat that looked more expensive than most cars. His expression was controlled, too controlled. "Officer Hayes," he said smoothly, "I assume there's some misunderstanding." "Your son was trespassing and appears intoxicated," Mark replied, voice steady. William smiled faintly. "My son was simply walking by our family property. Surely that's not a crime." Mark felt the old anger rise, the polished tone of power pretending to be reason. "Breaking a bottle and threatening an officer is." Preston glared at him. "You can't prove that." "Oh, I can," Mark said quietly. "My body cam's on." For a second, silence fell. The elder Davenport's smile faltered just slightly. Then, in a tone colder than the sea air, he said, "Careful, officer. Men who dig too deep in this town often drown." Mark met his gaze. "Then I'll make sure to swim." He turned, signaling Rex toward the patrol car. Preston cursed under his breath, but his father's hand on his shoulder silenced him. As Mark drove away, the adrenaline slowly faded, leaving only the heavy pulse of anger. Rex looked up at him, tilting his head. "Yeah," Mark muttered. "I know, buddy. We just stirred a nest." Back at the precinct, the night was thick with tired fluorescent light and the faint smell of burnt coffee. Mark sat at his desk writing the report when a shadow fell across his paperwork. Captain Laura Pierce stood there, tall, composed, early 40s, with sharp hazel eyes that could cut through excuses like glass. Her dark hair was tied in a tight bun, and her uniform was immaculate. "Hayes," she said evenly, "I just got a call from the Davenport estate. They're claiming harassment." Mark leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "Of course they are." Laura crossed her arms. "You want to tell me what really happened?" He did. Every word of it, from the threat at the market to the confrontation at the dock. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she exhaled slowly. "You know how deep their influence goes. I can't protect you if this turns political." Mark gave a small, weary smile. "I'm not asking for protection, just the truth." Her eyes softened. "Not much, but enough. You always pick the hardest road, don't you?" "Maybe," he said, "but at least I know where it leads." As she turned to leave, Laura paused. "Be careful, Hayes. Davenport plays nice until someone touches his pride. Then he burns everything around him." When the captain left, Mark rubbed his temples, staring at the half-finished report. The precinct around him buzzed with idle chatter, the hum of computers, the clink of coffee mugs. But he felt distant from all of it, caught between duty and a sense of something larger he couldn't yet name. Outside, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady. The drops streaked the window beside his desk, blurring the city lights into streaks of silver. In another part of town, under that same rain, Emma sat in her small apartment above a bakery. She traced her fingers over the freshly mended bracelets spread on her table, the faint smell of wax and cedar filling the room. Sonny lay curled beside her, asleep but twitching, dreaming of open fields. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "This is Mark Hayes, just checking in. You doing okay tonight?" She smiled faintly, fingers hovering above the screen before replying, "I am now, thank you." Outside, the rain softened, the city sighed, and somewhere in the distance, a man in a black car watched her window from the opposite street, camera lens glinting briefly before vanishing into the dark. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving the city washed in silver light and quiet fatigue. Charleston's old streets glistened, their cobblestones still wet, reflecting the faded neon of coffee shops opening for the morning rush. Emma Brooks sat by the window of her small apartment above the bakery, staring at the condensation on the glass. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the echo of Preston's laughter and the cold authority of his father returned, mixing with the faint hum of the city below. Sonny lay curled beside her wheelchair, his golden fur damp from their brief morning walk. He lifted his head when she sighed, resting his muzzle on her footrest, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. "I know, boy," she murmured. "We just have to keep going." But as she turned to the table, her heart sank. The small donation jar she used for the shelter fund, once half full, now sat nearly empty. Bills were gone. Only coins remained. Emma blinked, confused. Then she noticed the faint mark on her doorframe, a scrape, fresh and deep, as if something metal had struck it. Her breath caught. Someone had been inside. Sonny's ears twitched. He let out a low, uncertain growl. She reached for her phone with trembling hands and dialed the number Mark had written on the note the day before. He answered almost immediately. "Emma?" "Someone broke into my apartment," she whispered. "Nothing smashed, but the money's gone. They left the door, locked again." Mark's tone hardened. "Don't touch anything. I'm coming." Within 15 minutes, his patrol car pulled up below the bakery. Officer Mark Hayes stepped out in uniform, Rex at his side, the dog's breath forming faint clouds in the cold morning air. He looked up and saw Emma waiting in her doorway, pale but composed. When he entered, His gaze swept the small room. Handmade crafts stacked neatly, the faint smell of cedar and candle wax, the scrape on the frame. He crouched, tracing the mark with gloved fingers. "Pry tool," he murmured. Someone forced it open carefully, knew what they were doing. Emma folded her arms, her voice shaking. "Do you think it's them?" "I think they're trying to scare you," he said, "and it's working." He took out his phone, snapped a few photos, then called it in. Within minutes, another car arrived, a quiet one, unmarked. The door opened and a woman stepped out, tall, composed, with a brown trench coat and hair tied back neatly. Detective Laura Pierce. Mark greeted her with a nod. "Appreciate you coming yourself." She gave a faint smile. "When Davenport's name shows up in a report, I like to see things firsthand." Her gaze shifted to Emma. "You must be Miss Brooks. I've heard about your work with the shelter. I'm sorry this happened." Emma nodded politely, still shaken. Laura circled the apartment with a trained eye, taking photos, jotting notes. Her tone was calm but purposeful. "No fingerprints on the door, but I'll have forensics run it anyway." They were careful, someone with resources. Mark exhaled slowly. "That fits the Davenports." Laura's lips thinned. "It fits a lot of people who think they own this city." After finishing the inspection, Laura turned to Emma. "Do you have anywhere else you can stay for a few days?" Emma hesitated. "No family nearby. I could maybe stay at the shelter's storage building, but—" Mark interrupted softly. "No, too isolated. Stay somewhere visible." Laura nodded in agreement. "He's right. I'll see if we can arrange temporary protection." But Mark shook his head. "We both know the department won't approve that. Not for something this unofficial." Laura sighed. "Then do what you always do, Hayes. Improvise." When she left, the room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of Emma's wall clock. Mark turned to her, expression gentler now. "You shouldn't stay alone tonight. I'll keep an eye on the block. Rex and I can park near the bakery." Emma looked at him, hesitant. "You don't have to." "Yeah," he said with a small smile, "but I will." That evening, Emma closed her shop early and went upstairs, locking the door twice. She sat by the window again, candlelight flickering across her face. Sonny lay by her feet, ears twitching at every creak outside. Down on the street, Mark's patrol car idled near the corner. Inside, he sipped lukewarm coffee, watching the windows above through the drizzle. Rex sat alert beside him, occasionally lifting his head to listen. Charleston was quiet at night, but that kind of quiet never comforted Mark. It was the silence before something moved. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Then Rex stiffened. His growl rumbled low in his chest. Mark followed his gaze. Across the street, a black sedan rolled slowly past Emma's building. Its headlights dimmed halfway, then brightened again, a pattern too deliberate to be random. Mark started the engine, following at a distance. The sedan turned down a narrow side street and stopped near a row of warehouses. Mark parked 2 blocks away, lights off. Rain began to fall again, faint but steady. Through the mist, he could see silhouettes. 3 men standing near the car. One of them gestured wildly, throwing a bottle against the wall. Another lit a cigarette, the flare briefly revealing Preston Davenport's face. Mark tightened his grip on the wheel. "Stay," he whispered to Rex, stepping out quietly. The wet pavement muffled his boots as he moved closer, staying behind cover. "Dad says we'll handle it tomorrow," one of the voices said. Not Preston's, but unfamiliar, older, with a hard edge. Then Preston spoke, his words slurred but venomous. "No. She doesn't get another night to play victim. We end it now." Before Mark could step forward, the 4th man appeared from the car, tall, wearing a black suit, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. His tone was calm, surgical. "No blood. Just fear. The message will be enough." The men nodded. Mark pulled out his phone, quietly recording, but a faint click from his holster gave him away. Heads turned. "Hey!" Preston shouted. "Who's there?" Mark stepped out of the shadows, badge raised. "Charleston PD! Hands where I can see them!" The men scattered. Tires screeched as the sedan peeled off. Mark sprinted, slipping slightly on the wet pavement, shouting, "Stop! Police!" Rex lunged from the patrol car as Mark whistled sharply. The dog intercepted one man, the driver, pinning him down in a blur of fur and fury. Mark cuffed him fast. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man, mid-30s, shaved head, tattoo creeping up his neck, just smirked. "You think it matters? You can't touch the people who sign the checks." Mark's jaw clenched. "We'll see." By dawn, he was back at the precinct. The arrested man refused to name names. The car was stolen. The fingerprints, clean. When Mark finally returned to the street outside Emma's building, she was already waiting at the window. The moment she saw him, her shoulders relaxed just slightly. He looked up, managing a tired smile. "All clear for now." She smiled back faintly. "You look like you've been through hell." He chuckled softly. "Hell's just another beat." But as he got back into the car, his phone buzzed. A message with no sender ID. "You should have stayed out of this, officer." He stared at the screen, then looked at Rex. The dog met his gaze, silent but knowing. "Guess we're both in it now, partner," Mark said quietly. And somewhere across Charleston, under the glow of dawn, a man in a black suit made another call, his voice cold and precise. "Change of plan. If he won't stop, take the dog first." Charleston woke under a pale, uneasy sky. The air carried the smell of rain and burnt rubber, a city pretending it hadn't seen what happened in the dark. Officer Mark Hayes sat in his car outside the precinct, watching a city worker scrub graffiti off a nearby wall. The words had read, "Justice is just a word." He wished that weren't true. Rex sat quietly in the back seat, eyes heavy but alert, tail thumping lightly against the upholstery whenever Mark spoke. "Another day, buddy," Mark murmured. "Let's try to make it count." But inside the precinct, hope was harder to find. The halls buzzed with whispers. He could feel them shift when he walked by. That careful silence that meant someone powerful had started making phone calls. At his desk, he found an envelope, plain, unmarked. Inside was his own report from last night's arrest, now stamped "Case closed." Insufficient evidence. Mark stared at it, jaw tightening. He looked up at Captain Laura Pierce, standing by her office window. Her eyes met his through the glass. She didn't look surprised. "They pulled it already?" he asked, stepping inside. Laura nodded grimly. "The suspect's gone, released before sunrise. No record, no prints. Davenport's lawyers must have worked through the night." Mark's voice was low, hard. "They're untouchable." Laura sighed. "They're careful. That's not the same thing." He gave a bitter half-smile. "Feels the same." She hesitated before adding, "And there's something else. Internal Affairs got a complaint. Anonymous. Says you've been harassing the Davenport family. They want your badge for review." Mark laughed, short, humorless. "Of course they do." "Lay low, Hayes," she warned softly. "Don't make yourself a bigger target." But it was already too late. That afternoon, Emma Brooks unlocked the door of her tiny handmade shop on Church Street, a narrow storefront filled with color and light, where everything from braided bracelets to carved candles told stories of hope. She was nervous, glancing around more than usual, but she had made a promise to herself, and to Mark, that she wouldn't let fear win. Sonny patted beside her, tail wagging gently as she swept the floor and arranged new displays. On the counter stood a small photo of her and the rescue dogs from the shelter fundraiser, taken before the fire. Behind it, a donation jar glittered faintly with spare change. By noon, the street outside was alive with tourists. For a while, she allowed herself to believe the worst had passed. Then she smelled smoke. At first, it was faint, like a candle snuffed out. But then Sonny barked, sharp and insistent, pawing at the door. Emma wheeled herself forward, heart racing. Across the glass, a flicker of movement, shadows running. And then the hiss of liquid splattering on the brick wall outside. Gasoline. Her breath caught. No. Sonny barked louder, frantic now. Emma's trembling fingers reached for her phone. But before she could dial, a match flared. The explosion wasn't large, but it was violent enough to shatter the window. Flames raced up the side of the building, licking the paint, devouring the banners she'd painted by hand. "Sonny, out!" she screamed. The dog obeyed instantly, darting through the broken doorway. Emma grabbed the nearest towel, trying to smother the small fires near her display table, but the smoke grew thick fast. Outside, people were shouting, running. Someone called 911. Emma's vision blurred as the heat closed in. Then, through the haze, she saw a familiar shape bursting through the door. Mark Hayes, jacket thrown off, Rex at his side. He grabbed her chair handles, coughing through the smoke. "Got you. Let's go." Rex barked at the flames, then turned and guided Sonny ahead. Mark pushed the wheelchair out through the broken glass just as firefighters arrived, hoses hissing. Outside, Emma gasped for air, clutching her chest. Her cheeks were streaked with soot and tears. Mark knelt beside her, hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," he said, voice hoarse, but steady. "You're okay." But her eyes weren't on him. They were on the shop, the handmade signs curling in the fire, the bracelets she'd spent months crafting melting into ash. "It's gone," she whispered. Mark looked back at the burning storefront, jaw tight. Not everything. He stayed with her until the fire was out. Reporters arrived, flashing cameras. One shouted, "Officer Hayes, is this connected to the Davenport case?" Mark turned away. No comment. He helped Emma into an ambulance, refusing to leave until she'd been cleared for smoke inhalation. When they were finally alone, Emma looked at him, voice trembling. "They did this, didn't they?" Mark hesitated, then nodded once. She closed her eyes. "All I wanted was to help animals. To make something good out of all this." "And you did," he said quietly. "That's why they're scared of you." She let out a shaky laugh. "Scared? They burned everything I own." Mark met her gaze. "Then we rebuild, but not alone this time." That evening, Mark returned to the precinct with a folder under his arm and fury in his veins. He placed it on Captain Pierce's desk. "This is arson," he said, "and if the department won't call it what it is, I'll go to the state investigators myself." Laura looked at him wearily. "You know what that'll cost you." "Yeah," he said, "but I'm already paying for silence." She studied him for a long moment, then closed the blinds and spoke in a low tone. "I'll forward it quietly. But if you do this, you're on your own, Hayes." He gave a grim smile. "When was I ever not?" Before he left, she stopped him. "Mark, be careful with that girl. People like Davenport don't just destroy buildings, they destroy symbols." He paused at the door. "Then we make her one they can't burn." Later that night, Emma sat wrapped in a blanket on a bench near the fire-damaged store, refusing to go home. Sonny lay at her feet, Rex beside him. Mark stood nearby, silent, watching the last embers die in the dark. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" Mark looked at her, his expression caught between sorrow and something like pride. "Every day," he said. "But stopping doesn't make the world kinder. It just makes it quieter for the wrong people." She nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. When he finally walked her home, he noticed the faint red writing on the alley wall beside her apartment, sprayed hastily in dripping paint. "Next time, it's your dog." His heart went cold. He turned to Rex, who was already growling softly, ears pricked. Mark took a slow breath, eyes scanning the dark rooftops. "They're getting desperate," he muttered, "and desperate men make mistakes." He reached into his pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper, a handwritten note Emma had given him before leaving the fire scene. The ink was smudged but readable. "You once told me doing nothing teaches bullies they can win. Don't stop now." Mark stared at it for a long moment, then folded it carefully into his jacket pocket, a quiet promise, forged in smoke and flame. Night returned to Charleston with the weight of unfinished justice. The rain had stopped, but the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to break. The ruins of Emma's store still smelled faintly of smoke, the air carrying the ghost of burned cedar and melted wax. Officer Mark Hayes leaned against his patrol car, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the boarded-up windows. Rex, his German Shepherd partner, sat beside him. Ears up, gaze alert, the very picture of controlled patience. He had spent the entire day replaying every frame of the surveillance footage from the fire. The arsonists had worn masks, gloves, and moved like they'd rehearsed it. Too professional for drunken vandals, too methodical for chance. Someone had paid for precision. At 8 p.m., a wow pulled up, a dark sedan, unmarked. Detective Laura Pierce stepped out, trench coat wrapped tight against the cold. Her sharp hazel eyes caught Mark's immediately. "You look like hell," she said flatly. He smirked. "You should see the other guy." "I did," she replied. "His lawyer already called the chief. You're this close to being pulled off the case." She held her fingers a breath apart. Mark ran a hand through his short, dark hair. "They want me quiet. That's how I know I'm close." Laura sighed, glancing toward the shop. "Hayes, I get it, but you can't take on the Davenports with a badge and stubbornness alone." He turned toward her, eyes steady. "Then I'll use something better. Proof." That got her attention. "Proof of what?" Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. "Of who's really giving the orders. I want them caught in their own game." Laura tilted her head. "You're talking entrapment." "I'm talking justice," he said. "They've burned her life down. It's time they walk into their own fire." She studied him a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, what's the plan?" 2 nights later, the air around Church Street carried a different kind of tension. The boarded windows of Emma's shop now hid something new behind them, small cameras, motion sensors, and a silent alarm wired to Mark's phone. Emma, though reluctant, had agreed to help. She sat at the same handmade counter she'd rebuilt from the ashes, a faint smile of defiance on her lips. Her fingers moved gently over a half-finished bracelet as she said, "You really think they'll come back?" Mark stood nearby, dressed in plain clothes, but every inch the cop beneath the calm. "Bullies don't stop when they win," he said quietly. "They stop when they're seen." Sunny, her loyal golden retriever, lay at her feet, occasionally glancing toward Rex, who was stationed in the back room, alert and waiting. Mark adjusted a small mic clipped beneath his collar. "Once the system triggers, we've got about 10 seconds before they realize it's live." Emma gave a nervous laugh. "You make it sound like a movie." He looked at her, tone softer now. "I wish it were." Then he left through the side alley, joining Laura in an unmarked car across the street. Hours passed. The street outside fell quiet. The last tourists faded into the glow of the city's bars and jazz clubs. Midnight approached. Inside the shop, Sonny's ears flicked. His low growl was the first warning. Emma froze. A faint scraping sound came from the door. The latch wiggled once, twice, then gave way. 3 shadows slipped in, moving with the ease of people who'd done this before. At their front was Preston Davenport, face hidden under a hood, voice dripping with arrogance. "Guess she really doesn't learn." Another man, Chad, his usual sidekick, chuckled. "Let's make sure she remembers this time." Preston's boot hit the counter, sending Emma's crafts scattering. She gasped, forcing herself to sound frightened. "Please, I already lost everything." "That's the point," Preston sneered. "You should have stayed invisible." His hand reached toward her bracelet tray, and the moment his fingers brushed the sensor beneath it, the silent alarm went off. Outside, Mark's phone buzzed. "They're in," he said. "Go," Laura ordered. Mark and Rex were through the door in seconds. Inside, the lights burst to life, flooding the shop in blinding white. Rex lunged forward, barking thunder into the night. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" Mark's voice boomed through the chaos. Preston stumbled back, eyes wide. Chad froze mid-step. The third man, Kyle, reached for the door, but Rex intercepted, pinning him with a snarl. Mark advanced, gun drawn, but steady. "Don't move." Preston's arrogance cracked. "You set us up." Mark's reply was ice. "No, Preston, you set yourself up." Behind him, Laura entered with 2 backup officers, cuffs ready. "Keep the cameras rolling," she said. Within minutes, all 3 were restrained. Preston tried to twist free, shouting, "You can't arrest me! My father—" Mark cut him off. "Your father doesn't own the state's evidence servers." He gestured toward the wall-mounted camera. "Everything you just did is live streaming to the district attorney's office." Preston froze, the color draining from his face. An hour later, at the precinct, the footage played on repeat in the evidence room, clear, sharp, and undeniable. Laura stood with her arms folded, satisfaction flickering through her calm exterior. Mark watched silently, exhaustion settling over him. When the final clip ended, he exhaled. "That's it. They can't bury this one." Laura nodded. "I'll send it to the State Bureau myself. By sunrise, it'll be public record." For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a thin thread of victory. Not triumph, just relief. But as they left the room, Laura's expression darkened. "Be careful, Hayes. You just embarrassed a man who built his empire on never being told no." Mark gave a grim smile. Then maybe it's time someone did. Outside, the first light of dawn brushed the horizon. Emma sat on the curb near her repaired storefront, wrapped in a thick gray coat, hands trembling around a cup of coffee. She looked up as Mark approached. "It's over," he said gently. Her eyes widened. "They're really going to jail?" "For once, yeah," he replied. "And not just them. The DA's office is opening an investigation into their father, too." She looked down, the relief breaking through in quiet tears. "I thought the world didn't care anymore." Mark knelt beside her, resting a gloved hand on Sonny's head. "It does. It just needs reminders." The dogs sat side by side again, Rex solid and watchful, Sonny soft and golden, symbols of something neither of them could yet name: endurance. Emma smiled faintly. "You never told me why you became a cop." Mark hesitated. "Because I thought the job was about keeping people safe." He looked toward the sunrise, the light catching the lines of his tired face. "Now I know it's about reminding them they still matter." She nodded, whispering, "That's what you did for me." He stood, offering her a quiet smile. Then maybe it was worth it. But peace in Charleston never lasted long. As Mark and Laura reviewed the footage later that morning, something unexpected flickered in the background of the recording, a shadow standing outside the window across the street. It wasn't one of the suspects. Laura paused the frame, zoomed in. The figure was older, wearing a black coat and gloves, face half hidden, but unmistakably William Davenport. Watching. Mark's stomach turned cold. "He was there," Laura nodded slowly. "And he knows exactly what you just did." Charleston woke to a dawn the color of pewter. The storm clouds that had lingered for days finally began to drift east, leaving the city washed clean, but weary. In the quiet streets, there was a sense that something had shifted, that justice, for once, had begun to stir. Officer Mark Hayes stood outside the courthouse, his breath forming faint ghosts in the cold morning air. Rex, his German shepherd, sat by his side, calm but vigilant. Across the street, news vans lined the curb, cameras humming, reporters murmuring rehearsed lines about the arrest of Preston Davenport and his friends. The footage Laura Pierce had sent to the State Bureau had spread faster than anyone expected. Every channel replayed the moment when Preston kicked over Emma's table, when Mark's voice rang out, steady, righteous, as he stopped them cold. Public outrage erupted. By morning, the governor's office demanded an official investigation into the Davenport family's pattern of influence. Inside the courthouse, William Davenport sat at the defense table in a perfectly tailored gray suit. His expression was as cold as the marble columns surrounding him. For decades, his money had bought silence, but today, silence had turned on him. Mark watched through the glass doors as state investigators filed in. His uniform was spotless, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of weeks of war. Laura joined him, trench coat draped over her arm. "You did it," she said quietly. He shook his head. "We did it, but it's not over yet." She followed his gaze toward the courtroom. No, men like Davenport don't lose gracefully. Outside, the city began to stir. Vendors opened their stalls again. The corner cafe brewed its first batch of coffee. And down on Church Street, a little shop that had been burned to ash just a week ago now stood half restored. Emma Brooks was there early, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her wheelchair sat beside a makeshift workbench stacked with wooden boards. Sonny, her golden retriever, wagged his tail every time she drove a nail. When Mark arrived, she looked up and smiled, a small, genuine smile that carried both weariness and peace. "You're early," she said. He grinned faintly. "Couldn't sleep." "Court nerves?" He shrugged. "Something like that." She tilted her head. "You don't strike me as the nervous type." "I'm not," he admitted. "But I am the type who's seen justice slip through cracks before. I just want this one to hold." Emma paused, then said softly, "It will. You did the right thing. People saw it. That matters." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her hands work. Graceful, sure. "You rebuild faster than most people breathe," he said. She smiled. "That's the trick, isn't it? When the world burns what you love, you build again before the ashes cool." They worked side by side for a while. Mark lifting boards, Emma measuring, Sonny stealing occasional nails just to earn a laugh. Rex lay in the sunlight, eyes half closed, content in rare calm. By afternoon, the courthouse steps filled with reporters. When the verdict came, preliminary charges against William Davenport for obstruction and conspiracy, the crowd erupted. It wasn't victory yet. But it was the crack in the armor no one thought possible. Laura approached Mark after the hearing, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. "State investigators want to speak with you. You'll probably be subpoenaed as a key witness." He nodded. "I figured." She hesitated. "You made enemies today." "I made peace with that a long time ago." She gave him a small, proud smile. "Then maybe this city still has a chance." Later that evening, as the light began to fade over Charleston, Mark found himself back at Emma's shop. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and candle wax, a new beginning, fragile but real. Emma was setting up her display table again. The new sign above the window read, "Second Chance Crafts." He stepped inside quietly. "You changed the name." She looked up. It felt right. After everything. Mark smiled. Fitting. Sonny barked softly, tail wagging, and nudged Rex playfully. The two dogs sat together near the entrance, one golden, one sable, watching the street like silent sentinels. Emma placed a small handmade charm on the counter. It was a silver badge-shaped pendant carved with a single word, hope. She handed it to him. "For you. For Rex." Mark looked down at it, the faint tremor in his hands betraying how much it meant. "Emma, She interrupted softly. "You kept me safe when the world went dark. Let me give something back." He nodded, voice low. "Then I'll wear it every day." Outside, the sun slipped lower, casting long shadows over the street. For the first time in weeks, laughter drifted from the open door, soft, hesitant, human. But peace has a way of whispering warnings. When the last customer left and the lights dimmed, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. No voice, just silence. And then, faintly, the sound of breathing. "Who is this?" he demanded. A pause, then a calm, familiar voice. "Justice isn't free, Officer Hayes." The line went dead. Mark stared at the phone, his reflection caught in the black glass. He exhaled slowly, the weight of reality returning like a tide. Rex growled softly, sensing the shift. Emma looked up from across the room. "Mark?" He pocketed the phone, forcing a smile. "Nothing, wrong number." But the look in his eyes told another story. The kind of look that comes when a man realizes the war he thought was ending is only changing shape. He stepped outside into the cool night air. Across the street, a sleek black car rolled slowly past, windows tinted. Mark's fingers brushed the silver pendant Emma had given him. He glanced down at Rex. "We stay ready, partner," he said quietly. The dog's amber eyes glinted in the streetlight, unblinking. As the car disappeared into the shadows, Mark turned back toward the shop. Inside, Emma was laughing softly at Sonny, who had stolen one of her paintbrushes. The golden glow of the lamp spilled out across the sidewalk, a fragile beacon against the night. For the first time in a long time, Mark smiled, not because danger was gone, but because hope somehow had survived. Sometimes God doesn't send miracles wrapped in thunder or light. Sometimes he sends them quietly. Through a loyal dog waiting by a burned door, through a stranger who refuses to walk away, or through a woman who rebuilds beauty from ashes. Mark believed justice was lost until he saw it rise again, not in a courtroom, but in kindness, in courage, and in one act of faith that refused to die. And Emma, though broken by cruelty, found that even in the ruins, God still plants seeds of hope, if we dare to look. Maybe that's the real miracle. Not that the world becomes perfect, but that hearts like theirs still believe it can. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment about what miracle you've witnessed in your life, and subscribe so you never miss another story of faith and courage. May God bless you and everyone you love, and may His light guide you just as it guided a policeman, a woman, and two brave dogs who refused to give up.